Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to Connection Matters podcast. This is episode 6. How are you today? I hope you're well. I'm really well. I've had a lovely, nourishing weekend with socially distanced meetups with friends in the woods, and I've also slept out under the stars, which is always so good, so good, so good, with my kids as well, which they just love. So yeah, I'm really pleased to have been able to do that, and that's really grounded me, ready for the week ahead. Today I'm bringing you the episode with Dan Puplett. Dan Puplett is a naturalist, conservationist and nature educator, and lifelong biophile, as it says in his bio. Biophilia is the term that was used according to the theory of the biologist E.O. Wilson, I think that's Edward Wilson, speaks of an innate and genetically determined affinity of human beings with the natural world. So this is a lot of what we're talking about, but particularly with Dan, because he has so much experience, so much wisdom across the nature connection field. He's a certified tracker and teaches a range of naturalist skills, including wildlife tracking, bird language, botany and nature connection. He also mentors people of all ages, from forest school kids to professional ecologists. He's Kamana Naturalist Training Program instructor, which is a program that I've wanted to do for so long, an online nature connection program, which I think takes quite a long time, but it gives you all the tools and resources that you need to really deepen your nature connection journey. And he's also an associate tutor for the Field Studies Council, which, if you don't know them, they run so many interesting courses all up and down the UK, and I think they have online resources as well. And he's also worked for the rewilding charity Trees for Life for over a decade and continues his involvement with this project. And that's another project which I knew about and have really wanted to know more about. And I didn't know until we spoke that Dan was involved with Trees for Life. I really love their mission and aims, which is reforesting and rewilding areas of Scotland. So I think the interview speaks for itself. Dan really knows his stuff. He's really well respected in his field, and I was excited to bring him to talk more about nature connection and tracking in this episode, but there's definitely scope for delving deeper with Dan in the future. If you like the podcast, then please do support us by subscribing. That means that you'll get all of the episodes into your inbox. And also, if you are in a position to be able to support us financially in any way, for as little as £3 a month, you get most of the content that we offer on our Patreon account, which is a way that people can support independent artists, musicians and podcasters, amongst other things, to provide what they do without having to resort to sponsorship. It'd be really good if you could have a look at our site there. That's patreon.com/Connection Matters podcast. Also, it really helps us if you can leave a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. That means that we get higher up the ratings and people are more likely to come across the podcast and get this amazing content. So without further ado, I hope that you enjoy this episode. All of the links will be in the show notes, and I look forward to hear your comments and feedback in our Instagram, leona.connection.matters, or Facebook or Patreon. This is Dan Puplett. Hello, Dan Puplett, and welcome to Connection Matters podcast. I'm really, really pleased to have you here. I've been trying to make contact with you for the last couple of years, I think, get you down to where we live to run a workshop, which we've not quite managed yet, but I'm sure we will after lockdown. But I'm really pleased to have you, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Leona, and thanks for the invitation. Really appreciate it. Excited to have a conversation with you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think the reason that we initially heard about you and became interested in the work that you do is through a friend, Laura McNally, who knew of you because of the amazing work that you do with the Kamana program and as I looked more, I thought, wow, yeah, I'm really keen to really skill up in the areas that of all of the things that you do. I wonder if you'd be willing to share a little bit about what it is that you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm self-employed basically, and I work as a mentor and trainer in naturalist skills. That's kind of one of the really kind of foundation of a lot of what I do, and as a nature connection mentor as well. So within that covers a few different things. One of my big passions is around tracking, wildlife tracking, and getting into real depth really, and discovering and learning more about the different signs that animals leave behind and interpreting them, and then also what that can teach us about the wildlife in our area and our wider landscape. So that's one of the things, wildlife tracking. And I also do a lot on bird language as well, which I imagine at least some of the people listening to the podcast will be aware of bird language, which I also teach, bird song identification, but bird language is I think of it almost like an audio aspect of tracking. And it's where this kind of art of interpreting the songs, calls, and the behavior of birds, and really kind of discovering what that can tell us about what's going on in the wider landscape, whether that's if there's a sparrowhawk coming or a fox or all these different things. So bird language is really, I just find it endlessly fascinating. So that's one of the naturalist skills I teach, I guess, and do quite a bit on foraging, on various things like general natural history, like tree identification and botany, and a whole range of things, even some stargazing workshops. I guess since I've been really young, been just fascinated by the natural world. So all these different aspects really fire me up, but particularly the tracking and the bird language are two big things for me, I suppose. Yeah. And then, also, oh, go on, Karen.
Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, so I do a lot of the stuff with adults, and at times I do freelance stuff for kind of teenage groups, and work as a forest school leader as well, and do things with groups. Program called Branching Out, which is up here in Scotland, which does basically supports people with mental health problems by taking them for a series of 12, like over 12 weeks, a series of sessions out in the woods doing bushcraft activities and stuff like that. And so things like that, do some bushcraft instructing. So kind of a range of different things. I really like to kind of get involved in various different things. And like I say, the core part of it is around wildlife and tracking.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that sounds amazing. I love the sound of the mental health program. I feel nature connection and, well, obviously just spending time in nature, but learning these deeper skills of tracking and the signs and everything that's around you is just such a good way of becoming present and finding relaxation, finding connection to yourself and the world around you. And so much evidence, isn't there, to say that it's really good for mental health.
Definitely, yeah. It's great actually to see how much that evidence is coming into the mainstream now, and it's really recognised, and it's really good to see with most people who come on those programs, the response even after a few weeks, in terms of and the stuff they report about improvements in their own mental health and stuff. So it's great, and all these different kind of activities, in, like you say, things like tracking or listening to birds, all in their own way help us to really become more present in the landscape, and that in itself can be so beneficial. And doing various things like, again, I'm sure a fair few listeners will be aware of a practice called the sit spot, which is like choosing a place just to go and sit quietly in nature and really pay attention to what's going on. It's a very simple practice, as it were, and a really powerful one too. And it's and that as well is something that people really kind of often naturally really get into when we do these programs, just even if it's 5 minutes, just sitting quietly and paying attention and journaling or whatever, and has some really great benefits.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more about that. I usually start with gratitude, so I'm going to share with you something that I'm grateful for right now, and it's really relating to the sit spot. Yesterday morning I was really struggling, actually. I just had a bit of a too many children in the house, 3 children, and I haven't had as much space as I would normally have, and having a few tit for tat arguments between them, and I just felt I just really need some space. And once we eventually got everyone together, we split off into 2 groups. The two boys went off on a bike ride, and then me and my daughter went off into the woods. And as soon as we got there, we sat still, and they know the practice of the sit spot, even though my daughter's only 6. And we just sat there for a good 20 minutes before we did anything else, before we did any adventuring or going off to find wood or set a fire or anything. We just literally sat and lay. And I have a lovely flat backed rock that I can lean against and look up at the trees. And this time of year, the new leaves are so, that pale green, that real beautiful light that comes through. There's a beech tree that was above me, but there's a lot of oak and birch in the woods as well. And it was absolute bliss. And within minutes, even walking into the wood, I could just feel my nervous system relaxing and just dropping all the tension and the stress and the anxiety that I'd been feeling, and felt myself again. And it's just profound. It doesn't matter how many times I do it, I forget it. And then every time I go back, I remember and go, why wasn't I here all weekend,
Yeah. That's such a common thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing. So I'm really grateful to live somewhere where I can do that, because we have, it's quite a densely populated valley that I'm in the Calder Valley, but there are lots of little secret wooded, high-sided valleys and river valleys that we can wander amongst to get our daily exercise, and I'm really loving that right now.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. I wonder if you'd like to share some gratitude.
Sure. Yeah. I definitely feel very grateful that I can also have access to nature where I live. I can step out my back door and being really just fantastic surroundings with so much around. And May in particular is a month that I really love. It's hard to pick a favourite month, but May is definitely up there. And even the very simple things like just seeing like daisies out there on the grass, or there's a couple of bullfinches that are coming to my feeder at the moment, just below the feeder, and really simple things that actually just, I don't know, add to my own sense of happiness and well-being so much that I just really regularly feel grateful for those kind of simple encounters with nature.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And we've got a bullfinch that visits our garden now. I've only got a tiny garden, but I've got an apple tree, and I don't think I've seen a bullfinch before this year in this garden. So it was really exciting to see.
Yeah, they're just stunning birds, aren't they? They're really, really spectacular. Yeah.
Super lovely. So I'm wondering how you got into all this. Have you always lived in wild settings and out in nature, or?
No, it's a good question. Funny enough, I was born in London. So I was born in the East End of London, so technically a Cockney, but moved away when I was really. So I remember my earliest memories of living in North London. So I remember being a kid, and even on, I don't know, I even remember very early on, like being in a pushchair. I joke with people saying this is one of my earliest tracking memories of being in a pushchair. And I remember seeing this is like in the late 70s. There used to be a lot more dog poo on the streets than there is now. And I remember quite a bit of it used to be white as well. And I used to see this as a kid. I was probably 3 years old, see this. And I just thought, I don't know where the thought came from, but I was convinced there was a man who was like the dog poo painting man who would just go and paint the dog poo white. So that was one of my earliest tracking things. I learned later on that wasn't actually quite accurate, but I was like 3, I was trying. Anyway, so I was, till I was 4 in kind of North London. And then I was very lucky to move to Borneo for a year when I was a kid. My stepdad's from Borneo, so we went out there for a year, and we spent a lot of time just going kind of a bit feral and playing on the beach and stuff, and having encounters with spiders and snakes, and it was super exciting. And I loved that as a kid. And I always felt, I think even before that, I just had like so many children do, this kind of natural pull towards nature and towards animals and plants and stuff. And then when I came back, I lived with my grandparents in Cornwall for a bit, and it started to really blossom. And my grandma was super into birds, and So I had influences around me that I think really supported that as well. And I'm super grateful for that to various relatives. I'm very lucky to live in an environment where different relatives saw from an early age that, I remember when I was at 6 and at the book club at school, you could choose what book you wanted. And I saw this book on butterflies. I was like, yes, I want that book. And so it just seems to kind of emerge. And I see that happen with a lot of people. I think pretty much everyone has that natural, what's often called biophilia, isn't it? I love that term, biophilia. There's E.O. Wilson who coined that one. And I think we have that I think it's a lot of people, it can get buried, but I was lucky that kind of flame was fanned. So basically, from a young age, always been just super fascinated by wildlife and looking out for birds, animals, all sorts. And then during my teens, I suppose, and at various points during my teens, I got involved in conservation volunteering, a bit of activism as well. And it just kind of went from there. And so I just always felt kind of pulled towards being involved in nature. Eventually went on to kind of study this kind of thing, and eventually kind of initially start working in conservation. My background is very much in conservation, so I worked for a conservation charity called Trees for Life for quite a long time, and that's what brought me up to the north of Scotland where I am now, and I still do some work with them time to time. They're a fantastic project. And then about 10 years ago or so, I've been doing a lot of this stuff anyway, like these kind of skills, like tracking in that for quite a long time before that, but decided I really wanted to get it out there in the world and just, do that full time. And so, that's kind of a very, very short, kind of a compressed answer. There's a lot more in that.
Well, I love what you said there about various adults bringing it out in you, because that's so important, isn't it? I really believe that we are nature, aren't we? We're born and we have all of that innate draw that's come from the entire length of the human existence. We've been fully immersed in nature and dependent on the world around us to survive. And it's only in the last even 50, 100 years that we've become so separate from that which sustains us, the food and the wood for the heat and the light and all of that, since we've had electricity, really. And it's really separated us. But it's there in us, and our DNA doesn't change that quickly, does it? So it's definitely there, and then to have adults who really care enough to bring that out and support that in children is so important.
Yeah, it's so key, and I like I say, I'm feel really grateful for that, and I'm really aware that not all kids, so many kids don't get that, or oftentimes even adults maybe are just not sure how to do that or aren't aware to do that. I think each generation is becoming more and more disconnected, which is obviously a really problematic thing. But I also, on the flip side, think it's encouraging to see a big shift as well, like we're saying, about an awareness of not only the benefits of nature for mental health, but also the benefits of nature for child development and things like that, and the boom in forest schools and all of these things, I think, are really encouraging signs as well. And just thinking back to those experiences where I had various adults in my life who really encouraged me, it just reminds me of how key those moments can be. And again, I feel lucky that I can remember, it must have been maybe 2, maybe 3, being shown my first buttercup, for example. And I can kind of still remember it as I saw it back then. And that memory of it is kind of like this huge, if you imagine a vast bowl with that, really fantastic glossy yellow inside, and being told like, oh, I must like butter and all of that. And it was just this moment of sheer magic as this kind of childlike wonder. And all it took is someone to show me this buttercup and like wave it under my chin. It blew me away. And maybe a year or so later, I showed my first acorn as well, and that the way the cap, that neat cap fits over the acorn itself. And again, I was just kind of like almost jaw dropping, just blown away by this amazing thing. And it was just someone exposed me to it and showed me it. So I think it doesn't take much. It just takes someone to be really present. Or it can take all sorts of things, but that's one of the things, is someone, an adult or someone, being really present and just taking the time to expose us as kids to these natural settings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think nature does a lot of the work as well.
Yeah, and sharing that childlike joy that we all feel whenever we see that kind of beauty. And I think sometimes we can squash it out of ourselves, don't we, by not paying attention and forgetting that the things that we see as everyday things are actually miracles and wondrous, amazing feats of design by whatever created the world around us. Just incredible.
Incredible, isn't it? And I think that thing of like taking, it's easy to take things for granted. I think that's so easy. And also I think I notice as well in say in the realm of environmental education, there's so much that I think is really valuable. This is something, a bit of a maybe digression in a way, but something that I love about the Kamana Naturalist training program, which if people aren't aware of it, this is a program that was written by John Young, who's a real nature connection pioneer. And Kamana is spelled Kamana, and it's basically a distance learning naturalist training program. And so you basically learn at your own kind of pace in your own place, and it involves a lot of sit spot time. To go through the whole program can take years and years, and it's fantastic. So I did the program, and now for quite a while I've been a mentor for the program. And what really drew me to it is it has these different elements. So there's lots of it as other kind of the classical natural history skills of learning the plants in your area, learning the birds, trees, and all these, like as much as possible, becoming very fluent, like almost like ecologically literate in what's going on around. And so that's one aspect. And it's not just that. I think if we focus only on that, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's really important. But if we focus only on that, sometimes there can be a kind of disconnection from that childlike wonder as well, from just, for example, seeing a daisy or an oak tree or a whatever, and just really, really looking closely without necessarily getting caught up in all the facts and stuff. But having said that, I really think as well, all the facts and the knowledge are valuable and have their place. And what I think is great is being able to kind of operate in different modes. So we have the information available to us when we need it. And that's super essential for practical purposes, like our ancestors would have had. They would have known the medicinal properties of plants or particular habits of different kinds of birds and what that means, and all of that stuff is really useful. And then also having this ability just to look more deeply without that filter of the kind of names and labels and stuff. So cultivating both of these, I think, is really important, and that's one of the things that programs like Kamana helps us to do.
That's brilliant that you've brought that in, because I was going to ask you, you're someone who's got that unique lens of, the conservation, environmental education, outdoor education side of things, but you've also done the art of mentoring and the Kamana program and wilderness awareness school. Is that right?
Yeah, so wilderness awareness school, that's what they basically run, the Kamana program.
Yeah.
So
So
I can help them out.
And that I know, because I've not done the Kamana program, but I have done the art of mentoring and have worked with the 8 Shields, and that level of thinking about connection as a completely different thing, really, to the environmental and nature education. It values the nature education, as you say, the names and the labels that we put to things, but it sees itself as a different thing, and that's something that's quite new, really, isn't it, to our culture here, thinking about the culture of nature connection and all of the benefits that can come and that are really needed.
Definitely, and I think I think that's really important, and in no way to negate people who are doing like pure nature education or anything like that, because like I say, it's super important. And something that I've observed, and I think it's well known now, is that we can have all the information we want. We have, at our fingertips, we've got so much information about the natural world and about all sorts of things. And it doesn't necessarily change behavior. Most of the time, it doesn't change behavior. Sometimes it does, but oftentimes we can continue acting in certain ways even if we have the information. And we really need to have some level of connection as well. And John, I remember him years ago saying something which really, to me, summed it up. He said, if you create the connection, the information will come along for the ride. And I really love that, because he was saying that people might be worried, hold on a minute, we've got to, surely there's a place to educate people or whatever. And he was saying this is definitely really the case. And as soon as you create that, if someone has this kind of starts to develop a relationship, I've seen this with kids, like, or even one of my nephews is nuts about foxes. And just because he's got such a passion for foxes now, he's just learning. Or I've got a niece from a different sibling, and since she was really young, she's really just loved sharks. And I'm a big shark fan myself as well. And then she just started finding out and telling me cool stuff about sharks that I didn't know, but she wasn't having to be forced to learn about sharks. She just was like, wow, sharks are amazing, and wanted to learn about them. That's how I found for myself as well, over the years accumulated, I don't know, like a bit of knowledge about different stuff here and there. And that's off the back of just being super interested. And we all do that. We tend to kind of, I don't know, discover more about or pay attention to the things that we really feel connected to. So,
passions and edges, isn't it? I love that, the way in the Eight Shields, which is a map for thinking about how we create life and events and connections for people at home who might not know of the Eight Shields. And the Eight Shields is the institute that the Art of Mentoring has come out of, and we've worked with the Eight Shields for quite a few years, working with our long-term program for home educated children. And the way that we assess the children, if that's the right word, the way that we monitor what we're doing and how well, how we can improve what we're doing, is that we look at what their passions and what their edges are, and we look at where they feel really alive. Where is it that they're getting really enthusiastic and engaged, and how can we support that more? And then where are their edges? So there might be a child who will never climb a tree, or they will never, they'll always let everybody else light the fires, and they won't do that thing. So, and whenever you can see those two sides, you can really support a child's learning, not by forcing them to have to be the one that always lights the fire, but when you notice something, you can then see what the struggle might be, or what it is, and unpick that a little bit, which is what good mentoring should be about, is not ever forcing or creating circumstances where we need to remember and go over things, but what is it that we need to know in order to overcome any blockages, and I love thinking of it in that way.
Definitely, and I think it really works as well, just from what I've seen, because the Art of Mentoring first came to the UK actually almost exactly 10 years ago, and quite a few of my friends involved in the kind of Art of Mentoring Eight Shield circles, I'm sure, like yourself, like mentoring their kids in that way. And now I see and know some of the kids who are now in their teens who have been brought through this method of mentoring, and it's really impressive to see what a lot of them what they're able to do. Really, really competent. I know, kids who can light a fire, say with a bow drill, or know a ton of different wild foods that you can eat, or got some really good tracking skills, and on top of that, really, there's something about this connection brings out a lot of really good kind of communication skills, and makes them kind of often like really just respectful and confident and all sorts. So it seems, I look at this and I think something's really working here. It's a really effective way of like this mentoring people in nature, and like you say, just like really skillfully looking at people's passions, looking at their edges, and then being able to help them kind of grow and develop through that. So so it's, even within this short time, it's been exciting to see like how these particular kind of methodologies, so to speak, really actually work. And I'm very much in a lot of ways, I just like seeing stuff. I like seeing the proof of stuff. Like, does this work? Doesn't it work? I look at this and I think, that works. That is effective. And
no, I absolutely agree. I think there's something about because I often think sometimes, am I barking up the wrong tree, going on about nature connection so much? Is it really, plenty of people live in cities and get on with their lives and are happy enough, and it's maybe I'm in a bubble, a niche that thinks that what I'm doing is so important, but actually, we see the world today, and the world isn't so healthy, and culture isn't so healthy, and the way that a lot of people are living isn't so healthy, and I grew up in that and had that same sense of not being so healthy at a point in my life. When I was younger, I was craving connection, and I was craving meaning and belonging to a land, and I really didn't know what that meant, and I didn't have the words to describe that, but I did have a sense that there's got to be more to life. And it was when I got into all the different things that I looked into around alternative living, about growing naturally, about permaculture, and then found my way into the nature connection world, which really just blew me away, and was what I felt so strongly was what a lot of people will really benefit from, and actually we can't really thrive without it. And I feel what you're describing with the young people who've grown up in a nature connected community, with mentors around them and who've had their passions and edges supported throughout, is so true. And I've seen it as well, where it's got to be something about when you're connected with nature and you understand what the land around you. You've done lots of wandering, and you've learnt about the plants and what plants are edible, or the tracks around you, or you understand the cycles and the seasons, and you're really in touch with that. You have a real sense of being nature, which I think not everybody. It's not what our education system teaches us, is it? And when you get that sense of being in nature, you're part of nature, and you understand the land around you. You belong here, and there's a sense of belonging and meaning that comes from that real strong connection. And I love that.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. And I think there's going back to saying before about biophilia. That's something that really. I feel it a lot in me, and I see it a lot in people around me. And I think even there's a lot of people who may be, say living in a very urban environment and apparently not particularly interested in nature or whatever. But even then, I'm sure, and I've seen it where it's just below the surface. It's just there. And even things like, say, the popularity of David Attenborough documentaries and things like that. To me, that somehow points to that. That people are just fascinated and really interested in finding out about the natural world, even though it expresses itself in various ways. And I see this from working with young kids, and I do quite a bit of the work I do, say with tracking and things like that, is training people who are professional ecologists. So people who are they're really kind of skillful at what they do, and often coming from more of a kind of an academic approach to it. And at the same time, there's still without fail, just having a bit of a conversation, see that these people often have been kind of nuts about nature since they were kids, and they still are just really fascinated by the simplest things, get excited about all sorts of things in the natural world. It's across the board. I think that connection is there. The other thing as well around, you're saying that we are nature, and I think that's a really important insight to keep coming back to, and particularly at the moment, in times when people are either like self-isolating or just at home a lot or whatever, and not necessarily having all the opportunities that they might like to connect. I think there's things I like to remind myself anyway of different. I'm lucky to live in the rural area, but say I'm in a city or whatever, I like to look around and just think of the ways in which all different objects around us are actually all derived from nature, like everything. And there's something about that of like this kind of tracking exercise of looking at, say for example, if we look at a load of like a concrete landscape and concrete, usually has limestone in it, which is, it's like the skeletons of sea creatures millions of years ago in ancient oceans. Just thinking of that, it's like, actually, this is all part of nature. Or looking at plastics, and even though plastics obviously can be problematic, most of them will be made from oil, which again is made of actually dead plants and animals. And just thinking all of this, we're absolutely immersed in it. Or our own bodies, we've got ridiculous amounts of microorganisms, more than we have human cells even, and so we're kind of like a walking ecosystem. And so we can't get away from it really, even. And the thought that we're something other than nature is just that. It's just a thought. And there's something about kind of looking more closely. And this isn't even some people might say, oh, that sounds a bit kind of like, I don't know, a bit of a romantic notion or anything like that. It's not, it's just a fact. You just have to look at it. It's just like, wow, this is actually, as soon as we look at what's going on, it's absolutely astonishing. Or even taking a step further back, there's nothing that we can look at that wasn't kind of exploded out of a star at some point in the distant past. And that is just a mind-blowing thing. If we could think about it, oftentimes we're too busy to really just stop and just reflect on that. But that itself is quite incredible. So even just, I like that, just kind of like these different musings, which can help in a way just take us back to like what's really going on here. Actually, we are literally just a part of nature.
Yeah, I love that. I did a nature quest recently, which is where I slept out on my own for 24 hours and sat in a beautiful spot in a woods near where I live, and there was this moment of just total, it's hard to describe, like awareness that grew in me when I saw these buzzards. I heard them first, this high-pitched call coming, and I thought, oh, here they come. And this pair of buzzards flew over and circled around and around where I was. And I just had that thought of, they were somewhere else. For the last 14 hours I've been here and they've been somewhere else. And something made them decide to come here at this point. I also saw a deer within the same 10 or 15 minutes apart of these buzzards, and had that same sense of, that deer is just living its life. What I do has no consequence, and it makes a decision moment by moment where it's going to go. I'm going to stop here and scrape away the ground, and I'm going to sit down and have a rest for an hour or so, which is what it did whenever I saw it. And then and then these buzzards came, and I just thought, life is going on all around us, and it has nothing to do with anything that we do. Obviously, a lot of wildlife has been driven away from its natural habitat, and that's problematic. But aside from that, wherever we are, there's always life happening. It might be fast life like other animals, or it might be slow life like the rock faces that slowly and gradually get worn away and weathered over time and have been there for millions of years. But it's all happening, isn't it? And I don't even know if I'm describing it very well, but it was just a really fully like, oh God, of course. And it's
all going on. And I really like that idea of things having, well, not even an idea, it's just, again, what happens. They, like you say, they have their independent lives. And I find this really interesting in tracking, for example. I think that takes us a step further when we're out tracking, because there's different kind of branches of tracking, including, like track and sign identification or aging the tracks and things like that. And I think it's really important just remembering, if we see a track, we can get into the details of like all the features of the footprint and stuff. Really, I find this super interesting, like working out who's been passed and all of that. And then actually remembering that right now there's a living, and most likely alive, it's not guaranteed, but most likely alive somewhere in the landscape. And just that thought of like, well, where is it now? Like, what's it up to? And all of these questions come, and that also helps build a stronger sense of connection with the wildlife around us. So it's not just, oh, that's a badger track, but wait, like, who is this particular badger? Like, what is it up to right now? What are its habits? I was just the other night, like early hours of the morning, I saw a badger right out by my bird feeder, just out the window here, and there's quite a few badger sets in my area, but there's a particular hole not that far away, and I'm just at the moment just wondering, I wonder if that's the same badger that's coming regularly. So that's the kind of a live question I've got at the moment, and just recognizing that animals do have like individual personalities, really. They'll behave, an individual animal will behave differently from another badger. One will be shyer and one will be bolder, and they'll have particular habits. Same with birds as well.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have their own kind of unique quirks and habits, and doing about their business, doing their own thing. And I just find that really, really fascinating and really important to remember. It's not just like, oh, it's a blackbird. It's like, oh, it's that particular blackbird, and that particular blackbird has an awareness of this particular area that, in a way that I completely don't know. So lots going on, basically.
So I was going to ask you about tracking. I've done a lot of bushcraft skills and a lot of building up my nature awareness over the years, and various connection side. But my tracking knowledge is very basic. But I also know that, when having been with people who are really great trackers, how it's like a superpower, isn't it? It's like you can see things that aren't there, and you can understand the world around you, which I think probably will give you even more of a sense of that feeling that I got a few weeks ago when I was on my nature quest, that sense of integration with the world, because you can see and feel and hear and smell and notice the things around you in a way that we're not really accustomed to doing anymore as humans. So my question around that is, because it's so niche and yet such an amazing skill, how is it relevant to this day and age? Because we don't need to search for our food anymore. We don't need to track in order to find, in order to survive, really, do we? So what's it about? And
yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a lot of different levels to that, and the first level I'd approach it at is quite a practical one, where a lot of the people I'm teaching and for myself as well, actually there is even though, like you say, most people don't need to track for their food, there are certain applications, particularly in conservation, where I find it really useful. Like, a lot of ecologists will be looking for particular field signs of red squirrels or water voles, and that is tracking. Basically, we're looking for signs and coming to a conclusion about what's in that area, and that's really beneficial for these fantastic species that I believe we have a responsibility to take care of. So some very kind of practical stuff in that sense. And then, but again, in some ways that's still niche, because there's a vast majority of people would say aren't professional ecologists or whatever. And from that perspective, I'd say that there's still this thing we were saying before about just nature connection, and helping or allowing people to get more acquainted with the wild world around us. That's something that we've said we've lost in a big way. And I see that as a kind of almost like an ecological literacy. Even 50 years ago, people were way more switched on to which birds are around and plants and all of that. And now that's been lost. So tracking it is a really effective gateway into that. And partly because it's so appealing as well. There's this kind of like CSI detective work aspect of it that appeals to so many of us. I think that's probably an ancient part of our brains that really gets fired up by it. So families or people with kids or adults or whoever, just kind of getting on the trail, like trying to solve a mystery. And then as a result of that, coming to understand more about the wildlife around us, which has got to be a good thing. As soon as we're aware of something, we're going to be much more motivated to protect it. So there's that aspect as well. It's just a powerful tool for nature connection. Use it quite a bit in like an educational setting with kids. So there's, like we said before, this kind of connection aspect and the educational side of it. So it's a really fun way, even if I kind of bring out my box of skulls and stuff like that, and I'll start asking a ton of questions, just even tiny little kids, you can show them a fox skull and ask, what do you think it eats? Is it a meat eater or a plant eater? And they'll start thinking about it and answering questions, and indirectly they're being given a lesson in kind of animal physiology and stuff like that. So there's an educational aspect too. And then other branches of it, I suppose, is we touched upon before, this aspect, almost a mindfulness aspect of just being out and paying close attention to what's going on around visually. With tracking, we're using as many of our senses as possible. So just that sense of being really immersed in a landscape, slowing down, paying close attention, has so many benefits. for us as well. So that's I think a big one. Yeah, it's kind of paying attention to all the kind of nature connection benefits that come from it as well. And then there's an aspect as well. There's a whole kind of I guess the thought process of tracking really kind of, it challenges us to be to see very clearly what's there, and it's actually a really hard thing to do. You know, to see very clearly what's there, and to then, I don't know, make deductions or draw conclusions from that, but also do that in a very clear way. So what I mean by that is that it can be so easy to see something and think see a footprint and we want it to be a badger, and it's just like, oh, and it's not very clear print at all, and just kind of, there's almost ways where we can kind of try and force it to be something. And so we've got to be like ruthlessly kind of self-honest with that and step back and say, like, there's various kind of deduction processes that we can use to make sure that we're seeing what we're seeing. So that's an aspect of it. It's just this kind of really clearly seeing what's there, and then also interpreting it after that and recognizing there's a difference between what we're seeing and the interpretations we make about it. And that's just a powerful lesson in its own right, because it applies to, like to tracking, and to tracking in a way that's really kind of rigorous and accurate. But then if we apply that, there's obvious applications in our daily lives. Even in a conversation, someone might say something and they mean one thing, and we hear it, and through various filters we make it mean something else. Or we might see someone behaving in a particular way, or say someone didn't respond to an email or whatever. So that's the data that's there in front of us. But then we add on a whole load of other things, like that person didn't email me because they're being super rude or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, again, it's like, okay, if we take it back, like with that kind of tracker's mind, let's look at the evidence. What actually is there? The person didn't reply to the email. That's all we know for sure. And then recognizing that anything else we put on top of that is an interpretation. So it's, not bringing it to sound all profound or whatever, but that's just an aspect of the kind of mindset that we can cultivate through tracking. So that's something I love about it. There's so many different branches. And then taking it quickly back to the kind of natural history aspects as well, I think it's a real gateway into learning I think almost more than any other kind of branch of natural history I can think of. It's a powerful gateway, so we can start looking at a footprint, and before long, if we ask enough questions, we're going to have to learn more about the plants in the area, about, say, trees, start observing and remembering the weather patterns, pay attention to the soil and the geology, start asking about where are the water courses and the food sources and all of these kind of things, and get to know the insects a bit better. All of these things can come just by getting into the process of tracking. So it's a very, just by using this one kind of access point of tracking, we start to kind of open our minds and our senses to all sorts of other aspects of the natural world. So I think it's really effective, an effective tool for nature awareness in that way.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love that. I love that description, and I love, because one of the questions I was going to ask was, how can being an excellent tracker translate into your life? But you shared that there about how we can, with that tracker's mindset, we're able to observe things and apply all of those elimination processes to our minds and the way we do things, because we do that a lot, don't we? We infer things and we make interpretations in all of our interactions. And the more that we're aware of that, the more aware that we are and that are able to really know ourselves and know what we're likely to be making meaning out of, the more we're able to be in actual connection, and that can be with humans and tracking our life and the way that we do things, and it can be out on the land there with all of our senses awake and alive alongside all the other than human beings. So it sounds so exciting, and it is definitely something that I really want to get more into. I do, when I realized what a deer bed looked like, it's like this thing that once you know it's there, you can't miss them. But before I knew that this little flattened, it can be tiny, little flattened area is a deer bed, I would have easily walked past them all the time. And then once I see them, and I see around here, because there's a lot of steep-sided valleys, the deers pick quite cool places to stop. and they're quite often places that I enjoy sitting then imagining what it feels like to be that deer sitting looking out over this steep-sided valley down to the town. It's just it's amazing, and that's like a small piece of information that someone shared with me, and obviously you just go from there. Your mind gets into it, doesn't it? It's just that thing of creating the story around it, because that's what helps you search for the other signs, the evidence. What could this deer have been doing before and after? And then you're looking for the evidence, and also then peeling it back to what do you actually know and what's actually going on here.
Yeah, and that's really important. And there's times, we might create a particular theory or story about a bit of tracking evidence we see, and we may well be right. We may think, okay, we're on the right trail here, and so it's great we may be right, and that's often after having gone through the process of like eliminating possibilities where we could have gone off on a tangent. And even when we're pretty sure, okay, this is pretty accurate, always being open to that possibility. Okay, we could be wrong, unless you 100% see the animal right there, there's always that slight chance, okay, could be wrong, it's probably this. And so having, I guess, tracking kind of breeds a certain degree of humility, that nobody knows everything, and we don't always get it right, but we continually develop and hone those skills so we get more and more accurate. And what you said about the deer bed was really nice as well. It just ties into the a particular concept in tracking, often referred to as larders and lacks. So, which you may have come across, this idea that animals and humans as well, really, as another species of animal, we're pushed and pulled across the landscape by various forces, often involving like the need for safety and food and reproduction and all these different things. And if we start, so for example, with a deer bed, on a particular day, if it's kind of quite a cold, crisp but sunny winter's day, if you were to try to think, okay, could we predict where the deer are most likely to be lying up at the moment? We're probably going to be thinking about kind of south-facing slopes with a good view, with a bit of cover, and so we start again. That's an example of how tracking can tie us into the wider landscape and this landscape scale kind of perspective, really. And something I just remembered as well, something you said about the tracking being kind of like a superpower in a way, and what you said, that was a good example of when you had the deer bed pointed out to you, then you just started seeing them everywhere, and that's always the case, and it's endless as well. I think it doesn't matter how long someone's been out tracking, there's always stuff that we're not seeing. We see more and more, but there's always going to be stuff that's outside of the range of even the most skillful tracker, and that's something exciting about it as well. It's just like, okay, I can see this now, what is it I'm not seeing? And that's why one of the things I find it exciting to go out with trackers who are more experienced than me and have things pointed out and just think, wow, I never saw that, and I wouldn't have seen that, but now my awareness has been stretched. I'll see that more in the future, just like you're describing. That kind of keep going, and everyone has that ability. I think it's really hard. There's so many of these nature connection skills and naturalist skills which are really hardwired into us. The ability to recognize patterns, to detect subtle clues, to make deductions, and all of those things I think are really hardwired into us, and it doesn't take much to kind of reawaken them.
Can we do it in the city?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. You mean tracking?
Yeah.
I've had some really fun tracking and bird language experiences in the city, and even if it's like tracking rats or squirrels or all sorts, there's always clues around, and in parks, or even in kind of not in parks. I remember being in years ago, I was actually very lucky to be out in a wolf and lynx tracking survey in Slovakia, and then getting back to the city, to Bratislava, and we were kind of in tracking mode, and there's a bit of snow on the ground. I looked down, I was like, oh, there's a load of rat tracks, and we're there on the pavement, people walking by getting excited about these rat tracks there, but all sorts of stuff we can find in the city. There's foxes and even badgers occasionally come into some cities, and loads of different things. In terms of bird language, I find that's also something that can be really that really applies everywhere. So just to kind of recap, this skill of, like, I think it's the audio aspect of tracking, where we're paying attention to bird behavior, like how they're moving, and also to their calls. And so beyond song recognition, which I find super interesting, but it's also, there's tons of different kinds of bird call, like contact calls and alarm calls and territorial calls and all these different things. And when we really start paying attention, we really get a better understanding of what's going on around. And birds, they're really kind of prevalent in a lot of our lives. There's a lot of places you go where birds will be somewhere visible.
Mm.
And they obviously need to be really, really aware of their environments for everything that they need, all the stuff we discussed before. So just by paying attention to them, it doesn't take long before we can really notice. It's oftentimes I have the back door open here if I'm kind of working at my desk, and hear these kind of alarm patterns that signal the sparrowhawk's going to come by, or just not far away from here, various points. I've seen or have you come across a tawny owl because the birds make a particular kind of call sequence, and again, that just really can open our eyes and senses to the wild world. And in a city, I've seen that quite a few times. Particularly, it's brilliant watching pigeons. They'll tell us so much. City pigeons, even though they won't necessarily make a big vocal alarm, there's certain ways that we can see their flight patterns changing and shifting, and they'll often bunch up. And something about, it's like reading body language. Something about their body language looks kind of agitated and stressed. And there's been several times I've spotted a sparrowhawk soaring above, or a perched peregrine falcon somewhere, because of just paying attention to what the pigeons are doing and looking around. And there's people walking by not necessarily aware that that's happened. And there's probably a ton of times when I've missed it as well. But all of this stuff is going on if we really pay attention to it. So tracking and bird language can do both in the city, in the countryside, all sorts of places.
So it's a lot about dropping into our senses, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way that I don't think I ever did very consciously for a long time, really. Really paying attention to the sensations in my body, really listening to the furthest away sounds and the closest sounds, and trying to hold that awareness of all the sounds at once. And doing the same with our vision. We spend so often looking at screens, don't we, or other people, but when we're doing that, we're using a very narrow field of vision and moving into peripheral vision, or owl eyes, or there's many ways of calling it. We get access to a whole lot more information, don't we? I wonder if right now, because a lot of people are not doing what they normally do. Some people are working way more than they would normally do, and lots of people have children at home, and others are alone, and time is probably strange, if it's anything like it is for me. Seems stretched and flying by all at the same time. But with the situation we're in, everything's different. How can we be using this time? What are the kind of things that we can do to help us find connection?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. There's a lot of things, and actually some of the things that really come to mind are the fact that for a lot of people who are spending more time at home than they would have done otherwise, there is the chance to get to know what I like to call the wild neighborhood. We said before about all these different creatures doing their different things. And if we're out and about at work or whatever, we might be missing a lot of this stuff. And even if we do spend, if we do know our patch a bit anyway, there's always an opportunity to look more closely. So if you're lucky enough to have a garden and, say, a bird feeder, just paying attention to simple stuff like which birds are the shyest and which are the boldest if they get disturbed from the feeder, and which ones come back most quickly, or looking at flight patterns. So there may be say there's a particular pigeon or a crow or whatever that you see regularly, and then looking at where it flies to most regularly, looking at these kind of flight trails, and then start asking questions, get really curious, ask questions like, wow, where does that crow actually, where is it roosting? Where does it sleep? Has it got chicks at the moment? Has it, is it a male or is it a female? Or just, we can go endlessly into asking questions and getting curious about, especially about individuals. I think that's a great one. I love, like I love bird watching anywhere, and saying, oh wow, fantastic, there's a blackbird or whatever. But like I said before, getting to know that particular blackbird and starting to study its life and get more familiar with it. So that's one thing I think that can be quite accessible. Even if you don't have a garden, there's still birds that can often be seen, and so we can pay attention to those. Other things as well. I think there's some quite, I find, like fun kind of games or activities that can be done pretty much anywhere, like just looking for signs of life wherever you are. So if you're somewhere which is fairly rural, it'll be super easy. But if it's a really built up environment, it's more challenging. And there's stuff like even looking at, I can see some lichens on the rooftop there, or I can see a bit of moss in the cracks, or whatever it might be. But just really closely paying attention to the life that's around us. And then if people are really, like some people are, and this is, I think quite a bit about people who are maybe like properly locked down, so they can't actually get out of their house at the moment, and maybe in a block of flats right in the middle of the city. And that's a pretty challenging situation. And things like even looking at weather patterns, which can be done if you've got access to a window and some sky, just like really paying attention to what's the wind direction doing today, looking at the clouds, seeing if we can even predict what the weather's going to do the next day based on what it's doing now. All these different things which can be accessible from places,
And tracking the sun.
Yeah.
One side of the house is always sunny in the morning, and the other side of the house is always sunny in the evening. And there's a chunk in the middle of the day where we've got a little bit on both sides, but we're still in shadow a little bit as well. And it changes what we do. It changes how we are. And I think it's really interesting. When you spend more time in one place, you notice these things more, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And all sorts of things, paying attention to the sun, whatever else we can see. I mean, up where I am now in the north of Scotland, the nights now, the evenings are so light that we're seeing stars less and less already. But if stars are visible, paying attention to if you can see any, even in the city, actually, some constellations will stand out pretty clearly, even if you don't see a whole load of them. So paying attention to constellations, we can see in the northwest in the evenings, roughly in the northwest here, Venus is really visible. So things like that. So just seeing what's around. And another one of these kind of reflections or musings that I like to do sometimes. So even if we might be somewhere that's pretty built up or whatever, thinking that actually we're on a planet that's going through the solar system, which is around, is centered around one star, which is one of billions in our galaxy, which is one of billions of galaxies in the universe. So wherever we are, we're literally in a vast wilderness. Even if it seems in the immediate circumstance, it seems pretty kind of built up. We're actually, just in a vast wilderness. And it's kind of easy to say, I have access to countryside on my doorstep, so it's easy to say. But if there isn't any other option, if you are really in somewhere built up, I've found that myself, being times in a city, just reflecting on things like that. Or even, for example, just so if you're in the UK, just the fact that if you take a breath of air, most likely, just based on our prevailing wind, most of the time that those air molecules probably were like whistling across the Atlantic not that long ago. Just to think about this air kind of, again, this vast wilderness. So it doesn't. I guess it's just like shifts in perspectives in certain ways can help. Things like journaling is great as well. Like these things I said about observing what's happening in your patch. So however you like to do that, whether it's voice recording or making sketches or drawing, just making a few notes about the animals and the plants and stuff you're seeing. And over time, it's interesting to see the different patterns that can emerge from that as well. So,
yeah, that sounds great. And I love having my phone with me now to be able to take notes, because it feels much quicker and accessible, because we've got our phones, don't we?
Yeah.
Your work is mostly outside, like mine, and obviously situation is at the moment that we are not supposed to gather in groups and that kind of thing. What are you doing now that work-wise, and what are you hoping to do for the rest of the year?
So it's one of those situations, especially for those of us who work a lot in the outdoors. It's, I think, presented a lot of us with some big challenges. And One of the things I've started to develop is a series of webinars on covering different aspects of the natural world. So recently did a couple of foraging webinars and also an introduction to birdsong. So, and I've got other ones coming up. I've got a tracking one and tree ID and stuff like that. And so that's a way which I hadn't really, hadn't used that format before. I've been involved in some webinar things before, but not in a big way. And yeah, I realised that's the way that can reach out to people who are in all different places. So I'm in the north of Scotland, and we had people in Devon and Cornwall, someone from Spain, someone from Ohio, on these various things. I thought, wow, this is in some ways kind of ironic that this technology can really connect us as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm doing a bit of that, and it's definitely not the same as being out in the field with people, and it's definitely something which hopefully is useful as well. And other stuff as well. So there's some other kind of related things. So designing some courses for there's an organisation, the Field Studies Council, who I'm also an associate tutor for. I run some courses for them, and I'll be doing a tracking based thing for them online coming up. And yeah, so various things like that. So,
right.
A lot of the behind the scenes stuff, and also getting out there. I've got a guide, one of the Field Studies Council's laminated charts, which I wrote last year. It's a guide to British bird tracks and signs. So basically, doing work promoting that, trying to get out there. So there's things I can do from here, and then getting out tracking and just spending time out and about,
making the most of it.
Yeah.
Great. So if people like the sound of the work that you're doing, how do they get in touch with you, or how do they learn about what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So I have a website. So my website's danpuplett.co.uk. So it's all one word. A few people can spell my name. It's Puplett. There's an odd one, danpuplett.co.uk. And now I've got an events list and a mailing list and all sorts of stuff on there. And I'm also on the usual social media, especially Facebook and Instagram. So I post different kind of quizzes and stuff like different kind of tracks and signs I found in the field and various things on there. So there's different ways if you want to find out more. There are a couple of ways, and if you want to get in touch, if you have questions, just through my website, there's a contact form as well. So I'm really happy to answer questions and to hear from you.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. And your website's beautiful, very clear and informative, and there's loads of interesting stuff there. So yeah, thank you. Well, that's been lovely. Thanks so much for talking and musing with me about my questions about tracking, and I've loved being re-inspired to think about tracking and going more in depth with it. And hopefully at the end of lockdown we'll be able to gather again and arrange to come and join one of your courses or something.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, thanks for the invitation as well. It's been really good talking.
Pleasure. Thanks very much. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I hope it inspires you to follow your path of deep connection. I love sharing this information, and I'll always share any relevant links in my show notes. If you like the show, please consider supporting it at patreon.com/Connection Matters Podcast. This is where you'll find bonus episodes, giveaways, and behind-the-scenes content from me, as well as having my huge heartfelt thanks for any support you can give me. It really helps with the viability of the show. You can get most of what will be on offer for as little as £3 a month. Please also don't forget to subscribe on whatever app you use by clicking that little subscribe button below. That way you'll get all the upcoming episodes straight into your device. And review on iTunes and Apple Podcasts. It's so helpful. The music that opens and closes the show is actually my very own dad, and you can hear more of his music at soundcloud.com/Vision Ray.